church or the synodality of the church. As many of you think, the synodality or the dimension or synodal dimension of the church is a new topic in the theological circles of the Catholic Church, especially after the coming of Pope Francis to the pontificate in 2013. So it is Pope Francis who has encouraged, who has enkindled the discussions, the theological discussions on synodality of the church. So we will try our best to understand what is meant by the synodality or the synodal dimension of the church. Pope Francis has issued many documents and homilies and exhortations regarding the synodal dimension of the church and the synodality of the church. For Pope Francis, the church is constitutively synodal. It is something important to note that point. For him, the church is constitutively synodal. It has a theological sense, historical sense, biblical foundation, and even Trinitarian foundation, he argues so. So, for Pope Francis, the church is constitutively synodal, and then he invites the whole Catholic Church, both the Latin Catholic Church and the Eastern churches that have declared their communion with the Bishop of Rome, to travel the synodal path. So for that, he invites the whole church to look to the image, to the model of the early church, especially the church of the first millennium, where the church was constitutively and practically synodal. Then he invites the Catholic Church to learn from the Orthodox Christians the synodal dimension of the church. So it is a bit disturbing for some traditional Catholics to hear from a Pope who invites the whole Catholic Church to look to the Orthodox Christians to learn about the synodal dimension of the church. Then for Pope Francis, the church is constitutively synodal, and the early church, the church of the first millennium, was totally synodal. At the same time, we should understand that synodality or the discussions regarding the synodal dimension of the church is not an invention or discovery by Pope Francis. It was there in the church, because the synodality is already embedded in the church, in the canonical structures of the church, in the history of the church, in the theology of the church. So the church was synodal. So it is only an invitation to return to that glorious past of the church. So it is not an invention or discovery by Pope Francis. Actually, what he is doing is delving or mining into the theological sources of the Second Vatican Council. So it was the Second Vatican Council that really encouraged the synodal dimension of the church, or the synodality of the church, to encourage, to enkindle the synodal flames in the church. The Second Vatican Council used mainly 5 pillars, theological pillars, we can say that. 5 theological pillars of the Second Vatican Council were so helpful for Pope Francis to lead the whole Catholic Church to the synodal path. So before analyzing those 5 theological pillars, we should have an introductory note or an initiation into the terminological knowledge. Synod means the term synod comes from two Greek words. Syn, S-Y-N. Swin is a preposition, and it means with. Odos, O-D-O-S, odos. It's a noun that means journey, path. Um, so, synodos. Synodos means to travel together, to be with, to be with, or to journey together, or traveling together, journeying together. All these meanings are hidden in the term synod. So the Greek term synodos was translated to Latin synods, and also concilium also was used in the Latin language to indicate the councils and synodal traditions of the church. So synod is a Greek term. From the semantic domain, some of you know the Syriac version of the term, that means sunahados. Sunahados also is coming from synodos. So from their semantic domain is one and the same. That's why in Syriac, for the Syrian Christians or the Syro-Malabarians are and also the Syro-Malangarites are also familiar with the term sunahados, that comes from the same term synodos. Okay, so now we are going to deal with the synodal foundations, or the theological foundations for the synodality of the church after the Second Vatican Council, or also that helped Pope Francis to return to the synodal path. There are five, as I have already told you, there are five theological pillars. The first one is the Trinitarian theological discovery of the Second Vatican Council, or the Trinitarian theology of the Second Vatican Council. The second one is the conciliar teaching regarding collegiality. The third one is the conciliar teaching regarding the people of God. The fourth one is the conciliar approach to the sensus fidelium or sensus fidei. The fifth one that we can point out is the conciliar approach to the theology of the local churches. So these five theological pillars are very important. So for your better understanding, I repeat those five theological pillars. The first one is the Trinitarian theology of the council. The second one is the collegiality, the conciliar teaching on collegiality. That means the collegial nature of the episcopal ministry. The third one is the conciliar approach or the conciliar theology teaching regarding the people, church as the people of God. Fourth one is the conciliar approach to the sensus fidei. The fifth and the final one is the conciliar teaching regarding the local churches. These five conciliar pillars are so significant, and they help really the Catholic Church of the present day to return to the synodal path of the church, or the synodal nature of the church. So what is meant by the Trinitarian theology of the council? So without understanding, as an introduction, I should say that without understanding these five theological concepts or theological foundations of the church, we cannot understand or we cannot grasp the synodal dimension of the church put forward by Pope Francis. So What is meant by the conciliar teaching regarding the Trinitarian theology? So, until or in the second millennium, we can say, in the second millennium, the Trinitarian theological aspects were completely ignored in the Catholic Church, in the theological circles of the Catholic Church. It had become Christomonistic. That means only the Christological dimension of the church was given an accent. The pneumatological or the Trinitarian dimension of the church was completely ignored. This Christo-monistic approach of the church really encouraged a monarchical structure and figure of the church. The whole church had become a monarchical uh, structure, we can say that. So when the Trinitarian theology was forgotten in the church, only the monarchical dimensions were given accent. The other, or the Trinitarian dimension, was ignored. It had an impact really in the church. That means to the bishops in the first millennium, the bishops assembled in the synods of the church, uh, especially having the theological color, theological tone of the Trinity. That means in the Trinity, there are three persons, as we know. So they are equal. No one reigns or dominates the other. Every person respects the individuality of the other. Every bishop, or no, every person respects the space of the other. So, having this theological foundation or theological structure of the Trinity, they assembled in the synods of the church. That means no bishop dominated the other. Every bishop respected the position of the other bishop, because every bishop was the head of a local church. It was the bishop who was the central figure of the local church. It was around him that the local church assembled together. It was he who was the real teacher of the local church. It was he who answered the questions of that local church to which he administered. So every bishop was so important in his local church. No other bishop, the neighboring bishop or the metropolitan bishop, dominated or acquired his rights. So they behaved in this manner in the synods of the church, having the theological foundation of Trinity. Because in Trinity, they were equals, they were respecting the positions of the other, the individuality of the other, the subjectivity of the other person. That's how they behaved. The bishops also behaved in the synods and councils and ecumenical councils of the early church. But in the second millennium of the church, these Trinitarian theological narrations or theological accents were completely ignored. Thereby, it had a consequence also on the synods of the church, by which the position of the bishops of the local church were given no importance, were given no relevance. In the synods of the second millennium of the history of the church, the bishops had no voice at all. Then the question comes, who had voice in the synods and councils? Evidently, in the second millennium of the church, the Catholic Church had a complete centralized administrative systems. So the centralized administrative structures were reigning or overpowering the local churches, the voices of the bishops. So this monarchical style of the administration of the church reached at its climax in this First Vatican Council. So, as you might have studied, in the First Vatican Council, there came the doctrinal teaching about the universal jurisdiction of the Roman pontiff and the infallibility of the Pope. These two doctrinal declarations were the highlights of the First Vatican Council. So it was true that the Pope or the Roman Pontiff had administrative powers all over the church, all over the world. And it was true that he had infallibility when he teaches about the faith and morals of the church. But the problem is that after the Vatican Council, the First Vatican Council, the interpretations of these two conciliar doctrinal declarations went to an extreme position. In other words, they were interpreted in extreme terms. That means the universal jurisdiction of the Pope had an impact on the local churches. That means the bishops were silenced. The complete administration was given to the Roman or to the Vatican, we can say, to the departments or to the dicasteries in Vatican. And the second consequence was when the Pope was given the infallibility, the infallible nature of the people of God, of the church, was ignored, or the faithful were given no importance with regard to the infallibility. In reality, in the first millennium, it was the people, the faithful, who declared their sensus fidei or sensus fidelium regarding an issue or doctrinal question. So the people were silent, the faithful were silenced. The inerrancy or the infallibility of the faithful was not taken into consideration after the First Vatican Council. Following these extremist interpretations, the faithful of the church, the believers of the church, were seen as a group who should obey everything, who should obey everything that is given from above. They cannot question, they cannot raise their voice, they cannot mark their opinions in the church. It was a great consequence of that took place after the First Vatican Council. So, having the Trinitarian theology of the Church of the first millennium, the Second Vatican Council regained this original Trinitarian theology and the hierarchical structure of the church, in which the bishops of the heads of the local church, that is the bishops, had their voice in the church, and also the faithful. After in the second millennium, the whole laity, the lay people were silenced by the hierarchy of the church. It's the truth. So Pope Francis, after the Vatican Council, is regaining those precious tradition of the Catholic Church. For that, he uses the theological narratives of the council regarding the people of God and regarding the faithful, the sensus fidei of the faithful. If you are when you if you are interested, you can read Lumen Gentium, article 12, where the council marked that the faithful of the church, the people of the church, or the laity of the church are also infallible regarding the faith and morals. So, if you have time, you can read those conciliar statements that regained, that revived the original spirit of sensus fidei as it happened in the first millennium of the church. So, the conciliar teaching regarding the Trinitarian theology and the people of God and sensus fidei were important for the upcoming of the synodal dimension of the church. Now, what remains is the conciliar teaching on collegiality. So, this is also the episcopal collegiality is also something that is connected with the whole historical outlines of the second millennium of the church, where the Roman pontiff acquired almost all the powers and administrative jurisdictional powers from the bishops. The bishops of the first millennium were the real teachers of the church. The bishops of the first millennium had full power in their local church. They reigned, they administered, they served their church, and they assembled in the synods and councils in the church, proposing or teaching the real, original, or the true teachings of the church. For example, I would say that first of all, in the history of the church, the synodal traditions, the synodal structures were given material form in the oriental wing of the Catholic Church. In the second place, the synodal structures were so powerful in the African continent, in the African churches. Then, together with the African churches, all the Western Church also stabilized the synodal structures in the church. So, you know that the first ecumenical council was convened in 325 at Nicaea. Before this Nicene Council, there were other local synods, provincial synods in the Catholic Church, in the whole church. Every council or synods published or promulgated some canons regarding the faith, morals, liturgy, and all. And the other churches accepted those promulgated canons from those synods and accepted as their own canonical, incorporated those canons into their canonical corpus. So it was at the synods and provincial councils or provincial synods that the canon law of the church was formed. The canon law of the church was given a material form in and through the synods. No other single head of the church formed the canon law. The real canon law, the origin of the canon law is the synods. The place of the birth of the canon law is the synods, the synods and provincial councils of the church. So the synods were so important, and provincial councils also were important for the whole church. Then another point is to be noted is that in the synods and provincial councils of the early church, and even in the ecumenical councils, the laity also participated actively. That means the bishop of a local church came to a synod, attended those synods and provincial councils, in order to report the voice of those faithful, of those laity of his local church. The synods were places where the bishops raised the voice can say, or he was a reporter of the laity in the synods. So it is the faith of the people, it is the faith of the laity that was raised in the synods of the church, of the early church of the first millennium. But in the second millennium, it was not so. The laity were silenced. The voice of the laity was not heard in the second millennium. For for your historical understanding, we can say that when there was the Arian heresy in the church in the fourth century, actually many bishops were with the teachings of the Arius, teachings of teachings of Arius. They were about to acknowledge, they were about to give some doctrinal color to those opinions of Arius. Only a few bishops were contrary to the teachings of Arius. The majority of the bishops were about to give, acknowledge, and consent and approval to the teachings of Arius, or the Arian heresy was about to be declared as the faith of the church. But the laity were opposing. It was the laity that raised their voice and opposed the Arian heresy, stating that no, what he is teaching is an error, is not, it is not true. Christ is both God and human. So the Arian heresy was really flattened by the laity, not by the bishops. So it was the voice of the laity that won in the first Nicene Ecumenical Council. So the creed that we say, that we pronounce, that we recite during our holy masses is generated by the first Nicene Council, and that creed comes from the voice of the laity. So after the council, a bishop who was with the people, who was with the laity, he is called Hilary of Poitiers. He is a doctor of the church. He was from France, and he, after the council, he wrote that the ears of the laity are purer than the hearts of the bishops. You got the point, I think. The ears of the laity, of the faithful, are purer than the hearts of the laity. So actually in the first millennium, the voice of the laity was so important. The faith of the church, the structure of the church, and the whole vitality of the church depended upon the voice of the laity that got its canonical color in and through the synods, provincial councils, provincial synods, and ecumenical councils. But in the second millennium, the whole synods, provincial councils, and ecumenical councils became an episcopal affair. That means the laity was completely silenced. No voice of the laity is heard in the synods or in the provincial or ecumenical councils of the church. It became completely a hierarchical or a episcopal business. So Does anyone have doubt? I hope that's okay. May I proceed? Okay. So Pope Francis is regaining that climate, that synodal climate of the first millennium of the church, where the laity had a voice. So in the second millennium, after the second Vatican Council, imitating the model of the first millennium, the bishops of the second Vatican Council uh, mm, demanded for the reacquiring of the synodal structure of the church. Then, having those demands of the bishops, Pope Paul VI established the Synod of Bishops. But that institution also, by the time, by 50 years, became purely an episcopal affair in which, or which had no connection with the laity of the church. So it was corrected by Pope Francis. He amended, he corrected the canonical stipulations of the Synod of Bishops, that is called Ordo Synodi. Those canons and laws and regulations regarding the Synod of Bishops is called Ordo Synodi. So Pope Francis has corrected the Ordo Synodi, stating that, hello dear bishops, what you are doing is not correct. The Synod of Bishops is not purely an episcopal affair. Before coming to the synods, please go and listen to your people, your faithful, and listen to what they say about the current issues, and collect all those voices, and then come to me, come together to Rome, and then we will discuss it together. This is the approach of Pope Francis, or Pope George Mario Bergoglio. This Bergoglian approach is something that is unconventional to the church. No, not to the church, but to the unconventional, to the post-conciliar church, where the synods were purely an episcopal affair. So Pope Francis is he modifies the Ordo Synodi, or the laws for laws and regulations for the canonical stipulations for the convocation of the Synod of Bishops of the Catholic Church, and states that before coming to the synods, go to your people, listen to them, and collect their opinions, their voices, their words, and then come together. We will discuss it together. So this is the approach. So what is the theological reason behind this listening to the people? That's the main question. So the theological background for this listening to the people is, according to Pope Francis, and also according to the council, is that they have received the Holy Spirit in and through the sacraments, mainly, especially the baptism, the confirmation. So the Holy Spirit speaks to the church in and through the faithful, in and through the laity. So to know what the church, to know what the Holy Spirit speaks to the church, you should listen to the people, because it is to them, it is also in and through them that the Holy Spirit speaks, not only through the hierarchy, not only through the Pope, not only through the bishops, not only through the priests of the church. It is also in and through the laity that the Holy Spirit speaks to the church. So to know the totality of the truth of the church, and to know the totality of all that the Holy Spirit speaks to the church, we should, or you should also here listen to the people. This is the approach. This is the Bergoglian approach. That's why Pope Francis is regaining the synodal dimension of the church. So the conciliar teaching regarding the laity, the people of God, the faithful, was that in and through the reception of the sacraments, of sacrament of baptism, every person has become a space of the Holy Spirit. So the faithful also receive, they have that capacity of sensus fidei, the inerrancy of the faith. Even though they cannot verbally articulate all those things, they have this ability to grasp the content of the faith. That's why the bishops are required, are asked, are demanded by Pope Francis by the modification of the Ordo Synodi to listen to the people. So the final one may be the teaching, the conciliar teaching regarding the local churches. So following the model of the first millennium, Pope Francis is illuminating the theological aspect, the theological phase of the local church, because it is in the local church that we live our faith. It is in the local church that we proclaim our faith. It is in the local church that we celebrate the mysteries of the faith. So the accent should be given to the local church. Actually, it is a correction to the whole second millennium of history, to the history of the whole second millennium of the Catholic Church, where the accent was given not to the local church, but to the universal church. When the dimension of the universal church was given more importance, the structures of the universal church also got prominence. Consequently, the structures of the local church were demoted, were degraded. They were given a less significant space, theological and canonical space in the Catholic Church. Only the theology, only the universal church was given a glorified position, and the local church was completely neglected. It was corrected by the council. If you are interested, if you have time, you can read Lumen Gentium 23, where the conciliar fathers declared together in one voice that it is in and through the local church that the universal church exists. I repeat, it is in and through the local churches that the universal church exists. So the it implies that the prominence should be given to the local church. So these conciliar corrections are taken up by Pope Francis, and he is recommending, inviting the whole church to travel to that synodal path, or to take up the synodal path of the church, where the Pope, bishops, priest, laity travel together. Travel together. So here, Pope Francis is saying that sometimes the bishops have to lead the people, have to walk at the forefront, sometimes at the forefront, sometimes in the middle, sometimes in the back. So we travel together, we journey together. So the priests, bishops, and Pope travel together with the laity. In that traveling, in those moments, everyone is asked to listen to the other, to know what the Holy Spirit speaks to the church. So, dear students, for the last 45 minutes, I have spoken uninterruptedly. So now it is time for you to make your interventions and doubts. If you so if you have any of them, you can. I know that the synodality is a very very lengthy topic. We cannot cover. We cannot deal with this topic with this limited time. If you are interested, you can go to my YouTube channel, where I have already published some contents in Malayalam. uh, in Some English contents will be given in very soon, but at the moment, it is there. There are some audio books regarding the synodality or the synodal dimension of the church, the synodal aspect of the episcopal ministry, in the audio format. You can listen to my audio book, so that you can be enlightened.